Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I am honored and thrilled to be joined by an internationally renowned combat leader and diplomat. That's retired U.S. Army Colonel Christopher Kolenda, Dr. Chris Kolenda, who recently completed the 1,700-mile Fallen Hero Honor Ride to visit the graves of 6 paratroopers from his unit who were killed in Afghanistan and to raise support for the 800 survivors and their families who need help. It's been covered all over on CNN and many other media outlets, and it's an honor to have you on the program, Chris. Thanks so much for joining us.
Shalom, I really appreciate you having me on your program.
Absolutely. So let's talk about you for a moment. Obviously, you have a quite the career in the Army, and thank you for your service. I'm curious to hear about that experience and all of those subsequent events that led to you doing what many would call crazy.
Yeah, my neighbor actually called it crazy when I first floated the idea. We were coming up on the 15-year anniversary of our unit's deployment to Afghanistan in 2007 and 8. And I wanted to do something special to honor the service and sacrifice of the 6 paratroopers who were killed in action, and then also recognize the service of the 800 or so surviving members and their families. And I thought, well, and so that entailed in visiting their graves. And I thought, I could drive the distance. We've got Chris Pfeiffer buried in Nebraska, Adrian Hike in Iowa, Jacob Lowell in Indiana, in Illinois, just outside Chicago, the Abraham Lincoln Cemetery. Ryan Fritchie in Indiana, outside of Indianapolis, Dave Boris in Eastern Pennsylvania, and Tom Bostic in Arlington National Cemetery. So that's about 1,700 miles. And I figured I could drive the distance and drive to each site, but I thought, that's just not quite substantial enough. I could walk it, but it would just take way too long. And I said to myself, you know what? I bet I could ride a bicycle that far. I mean, people ride cross country all the time. The only problems were that I didn't own a bicycle and I hadn't ridden a bicycle in 20 years. So this was April 2021 now. And I thought, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to get my butt in gear and get in shape. So I bought a nice road bike. I hired a cycling coach to get me in shape and started telling people so I don't chicken out. And we started the ride on September 25th of 2022, which is 15 years to the day when Chris Pfeiffer died of wounds. He died of wounds after fighting for his life for a month. He was in the San Antonio Military Hospital. His parents, Mike and Dar, were there, as was his wife, Karen, who was 9 months pregnant. Karen went into labor the day after Chris died, and the next day, their daughter Peyton was born. So she never knew her dad. And when we started at Chris's gravesite, his parents were there, Karen was there, and Peyton was there, and she got to hear more about her dad. She was also our first scholarship recipient, so that was pretty special.
Well, God bless you. Thank you so much for what you're doing. We've had you on in the past, and this is such an important topic. Really understanding veterans' mental health, which I know is something that all of our listeners care about. And there's a lot of lessons, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, from the honor ride. I know you've really, we always say in the Army, you do an AAR, you look at an after action report, and you look at, lessons learned. And I know you have a lot of those notes, but let's talk about some of the statistics. From what I know, over 7,000 service members were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. But when we talk about suicide, that number is staggering. Chris, what are those numbers looking like?
Yeah, 30,000 veterans died by suicide since September 11th, over 4 times the rate of people killed in combat. 22 veterans reportedly die by suicide daily. That doesn't account for overdoses. Within my own unit, within this group of 800, we've had more die due to suicide and overdoses than to enemy fire. And part of the reason for undertaking this ride was, I just can't know that people who had my back in combat for 15 months are struggling like this and not try to do something about it. So part of the ride was about honoring the dead, our 6 fallen heroes. And the other part of it was about supporting the living and raising funds for the Sabre 6 Foundation, which I established to support the 800 surviving members and their families to achieve new dreams.
Which is so important. Again, I'm chatting with Dr. Christopher Kolenda, retired U.S. Army colonel, who's completed the 1,700-mile Fallen Hero honor ride. That training must have whipped you into shape. And you visited the graves of the 6 paratroopers from your unit who were killed in action in Afghanistan. But yes, exactly as you're saying, Chris, that number is staggering. Over 30,000 veterans have died from suicide. Veterans from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And, I was actually just talking with my soldiers the other day in talking about experiencing post-traumatic stress, and it's normal, and you're raising awareness of a absolutely critical issue. So we're going to have to take a break in a moment, and I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper about some of the lessons learned. I've been studying some of your notes quite diligently, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. Again, we're talking with Dr. Chris Kolenda about his honor ride. You're listening to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. You can always get in touch with our sponsors, Tom Mirabali, healthplanchicago.com, or 630-863-3477, 630-863-3477, or of course his website, healthplanchicago.com, for all of your health insurance and Affordable Care Act needs. But again, a quick break here on the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We're going to continue talking about this incredible Fallen Hero honor ride with Dr. Chris Kolenda in just a moment. Welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I'm chatting with retired U.S. Army Colonel Chris Kolenda, who, again, as we've been talking about his honor ride and raising awareness around the mental health crisis that exists with veterans, but frankly exists across our country. Chris, you've been sharing a little bit about your journey, but I know you have a lot of lessons learned that you'd like to share with our listeners. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you think are relevant.
Well, in terms of veterans' mental health, I was riding across the Missouri River, and like many rivers in the United States, it's a glacier-cut river, where you've got, you've got the river, of course, but then you've got like a floodplain on either side of the river on the banks where you can grow stuff, and then you've got high ground on either side that helps you gain new perspective. And pedaling across that, I was like, combat's a lot like a glacier that moves through your life at a high rate of speed, and it changes you. Just like that glacier changed the terrain when it moved through, combat changes you. It doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're different. And so, post-traumatic stress disorder, this is not a clinical diagnosis. This is a common sense diagnosis. Post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a disorder when your past is in control of you. When you're in the river, you can only drift in one direction, that's downhill. Most of us have post-traumatic stress normal. I mean, you're going to be affected by this, by these experiences. And part of it's acceptance and just knowing that I'm different. And in that way, you are in control of your past. And then there's post-traumatic stress growth, which is you use those experiences to soar to new heights. And so the glacier I found was a pretty good analogy. Combat is post-traumatic stress is a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance, and combat's one of those abnormal extended circumstances.
Wow. That's incredible lessons learned, but certainly in your own training for this honor ride, I know that it's required quite a bit of commitment. Any real key takeaways that you can briefly share with our listeners?
Well, if you want to achieve big goals, you've got to do 3 things. The first one is you've got to put your stake in the ground, make a commitment. And in my case, the commitment was I'm going to spring for a pretty expensive road bike, because that way I know that I'm going to ride it. It's not just going to sit in a garage. People are like, oh, just get a used one, see if you like it. I was like, I can't afford to see if I like it, because if it's a crummy bike, I won't ride it, and then I'll just put this in a too hard block. So I bought a really nice one and just started getting after it. The second one is get professional support. Coach Chuck Kyle was my cycling coach, and he was dynamite. He put together the training program for me. He made it simple and understandable. It wasn't overly complicated. It was pretty straightforward, and it was executable. And he helped me a lot along the way, especially with things like bike fit. And then third is, you make the emotional investment. You start telling people so you don't chicken out. So that kind of social accountability with people who are important to you really matters. And none of us do achieve big goals on our own. We do it with other people. My wife, my coaches, all the supporters, people like you who,
for sure,
cheering me on.
Chris, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to make sure our listeners can get in touch with you and learn more about your incredible journey. Can you share that information?
Yeah, you can write me an email at chris@strategicleadersacademy.com or check out our website, saber6foundation.com.
Really, really appreciate your passion, all that you're sharing with our listeners. I can't wait to have you back on real soon. Dr. Chris Kolenda, thank you so much. That's a wrap for us here on the show about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We'll be back next Sunday at 6 p.m. right here on AM 560 The Answer. To success, let's get down to business.